The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawn of the Riverside Country Club in Connecticut, where white roses and baby's breath adorned every corner in preparation for what should have been the most beautiful day of Jessica Martinez's life. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers mixed with the subtle aroma of expensive perfume from the arriving guests and the distant sound of catering staff arranging crystal glasses and silver cutlery for the evening reception that was expected to host over 200 of New England's social elite. Jessica stood in the luxurious bridal suite on the third floor of the historic club, her hands trembling as she held her iPhone, staring at a message that would shatter everything she believed about her marriage, her future, and the man she had loved for 3 years. The suite itself was a testament to old money elegance. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Antique furniture had been carefully arranged to create an atmosphere of timeless sophistication, and French doors opened onto a private balcony overlooking the manicured gardens where her ceremony would take place in just 3 hours. Michael is with someone else. Check the parking garage. Level 3. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. A friend who cares. The anonymous text had arrived at exactly 9:47 a.m., just 2 hours before her wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin, and the timestamp would be burned into her memory forever. Jessica's reflection stared back at her from the ornate gilded mirror that had supposedly belonged to a 19th-century railroad baroness. Her grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones that had been worn by 3 generations of Martinez women on their wedding days, caught the morning light. The silk dress that had taken 8 months to design and cost more than most people's cars hugged her figure perfectly. Every bead and crystal placed with mathematical precision by the most sought-after designer in New York. Her dark hair had been styled in an elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours to perfect, and her makeup was flawless, designed to photograph beautifully for the society pages that would feature their wedding in next month's issues. But her dark eyes, so similar to her brother David's, now held a storm of emotions that no amount of professional makeup could disguise. Her maid of honor, Sarah Chen, bustled around the room with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this wedding almost as intensively as Jessica herself. Sarah had been Jessica's roommate at Yale, her closest friend through law school, and the one person who had never seemed entirely convinced that Michael Thompson was the right man for her best friend, though she had never been able to articulate exactly why. "You look absolutely radiant, Jess," Sarah beamed, adjusting the delicate French lace veil that had been handmade by artisans in Lyon. "Michael is so lucky to have you. I still can't believe you're actually going through with this whole society wedding extravaganza instead of eloping to Vegas, like we used to joke about in college." Jessica forced a smile that felt like broken glass in her chest, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. Michael Thompson, her fiancé of 3 years, was the eldest son of one of Boston's most prominent families. The Thompsons had made their fortune in shipping in the 1800s, transitioned to banking in the early 1900s, and now controlled Thompson Investments, one of the most respected financial firms on the East Coast. Their engagement had been celebrated not just in society pages, but in business journals. Their love story seemingly perfect to everyone who knew them, the beautiful daughter of immigrants who had built herself into a successful lawyer, and the charming heir to a financial empire who had swept her off her feet during their final year at Yale Law School. Michael was everything that looked perfect on paper, 6'2" with the kind of classical good looks that belonged in Ralph Lauren advertisements, Harvard MBA, fluent in 3 languages, accomplished sailor who had competed in several prestigious regattas, and charming enough to make elderly society matrons giggle like teenagers at charity galas. He had pursued Jessica with the kind of focused intensity that had made her feel like the most important person in the world, sending her flowers every Friday for 6 months before their first date, remembering every detail of conversations they'd had, and introducing her to his family with obvious pride. But now, as wedding guests began arriving in their Mercedes and BMWs and Bentleys downstairs, Jessica found herself questioning everything. The late nights Michael claimed were client meetings with international investors, the distant phone calls he took in another room, the way he'd grown increasingly cold and controlling over the past 6 months, the subtle changes in their physical relationship that she'd attributed to wedding stress. It all began to make sense in the worst possible way. Her phone buzzed again, the sound making her jump so violently that Sarah looked up from arranging the train of Jessica's dress. "Everything okay? You seem really tense today, more than normal wedding day nerves. The new message was from her brother, David Martinez, and seeing his name on her phone brought a mixture of comfort and anxiety. David had built Martinez Industries from nothing after their parents died in a car accident, when Jessica was just 16 and David was 24, fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree and big dreams. He had sacrificed his own youth and social life to ensure Jessica could finish high school at the prestigious private academy their parents had worked so hard to afford, then put her through Yale while working 18-hour days to build the technology company that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in Silicon Valley. Hey, little sister. Everything going smoothly. I know you said you didn't want me to interfere with the wedding planning, but my assistant mentioned some irregularities with the Thompson family's business dealings that I thought you should know about. Can we talk privately before the ceremony? David had always been protective of Jessica, perhaps overly so, and she had attributed his lukewarm response to her engagement to typical big brother syndrome. He had been polite to Michael, had attended family dinners and social events, had even given his formal blessing to the engagement, but Jessica had sensed reservations that he never articulated. She had assumed it was simply difficulty accepting that his little sister was grown up and ready to start her own family. Now, staring at his message, while the anonymous warning burned in her memory, Jessica wondered if David's instincts had detected something she had been too in love to see. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, uncertainty and fear warring with her desire to believe that this was all some terrible mistake or malicious prank. How could she tell David that her perfect wedding day was crumbling? How could she admit that the man she was supposed to marry in less than 3 hours might be betraying her in the most humiliating way possible? How could she risk destroying everything based on an anonymous text that might not even be true? But as she looked at herself in that antique mirror, Jessica realized that she already knew the truth in her heart. The signs had been there for months, subtle changes that she had explained away because she hadn't wanted to see them. Michael's increasing preoccupation with business, his irritation when she asked questions about his work or his schedule, the way he had started making unilateral decisions about their future without consulting her, his insistence on a large traditional wedding when she had initially wanted something small and intimate. Most disturbing of all had been the conversation she had overheard 3 weeks ago when Michael was on a phone call in his study, speaking in low tones about maintaining appearances and securing the merger and playing the long game. When she had asked him about it later, he had dismissed her concerns and told her she was being paranoid and emotional, gaslighting her in a way that had left her questioning her own perceptions. Against every instinct telling her to ignore the message and focus on her wedding day, against every rational voice in her head warning her that some knowledge couldn't be unknown once learned, Jessica made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of her life. She told Sarah she needed some fresh air to calm her nerves and slipped out of the bridal suite, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears as she made her way through the country club's elegant hallways toward the attached parking garage. The transition from the warm, flower-scented interior of the club to the cool, concrete-scented parking garage felt symbolic somehow, like stepping from a beautiful lie into ugly reality. Her wedding dress rustled with each step as she climbed to the 3rd level, the sound echoing off the concrete walls in a way that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. The parking garage was dimly lit, designed more for function than beauty, a sharp contrast to the carefully orchestrated elegance of everything else connected to her wedding day. What she found there would be burned into her memory forever, every detail etched with the kind of clarity that comes with shock and trauma. Michael's silver BMW M8, the car he had bought to celebrate their engagement, was parked in a secluded corner away from the main traffic flow. Through the partially tinted windows, Jessica could see 2 figures in an intimate embrace that left no room for misinterpretation. Her fiancé was kissing another woman with a passion and tenderness he hadn't shown Jessica in months, his hands tangled in long blonde hair, their bodies pressed together with the familiarity of lovers who had been together for a long time. The woman was elegant and sophisticated, wearing a designer dress that Jessica recognized as Chanel, and as Jessica moved closer on trembling legs, she realized with a sinking heart that she knew exactly who it was: Victoria Ashford, Michael's childhood friend, the daughter of James Ashford, who was Robert Thompson's business partner and longtime family friend. Victoria, who had been at every Thompson family gathering since Jessica had started dating Michael, every company event, every charity gala, always hovering around Michael with a familiarity that had made Jessica uncomfortable, but that she had dismissed as paranoia born from her own insecurities about fitting into their social circle. Victoria, who had been Michael's sailing partner in several regattas, Victoria, who knew family stories and inside jokes that predated Jessica's relationship with Michael, Victoria, who had never shown anything but polite friendliness to Jessica, while apparently carrying on an affair with her fiancé throughout their entire relationship. Jessica stood frozen behind a concrete pillar, watching the man she was supposed to marry in less than 2 hours betray her with such casual cruelty that it felt surreal. Victoria's laugh echoed through the parking garage as Michael whispered something in her ear, and Jessica felt something fundamental break inside her chest, a pain so sharp and complete that it was almost physical. She pulled out her phone with hands that shook so violently she almost dropped it, and took several photographs, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Evidence? Proof for herself that this nightmare was real and not some stress-induced hallucination. The camera captured Michael's hand possessively gripping Victoria's waist, their lips pressed together in a kiss that spoke of long intimacy, the wedding ring he had already been wearing as part of their tradition, a Thompson family custom where the groom wore his band starting a week before the ceremony, clearly visible and somehow making the betrayal even more obscene. As Jessica backed away, trying to process what she had seen and figure out what she was supposed to do with this devastating knowledge, her heel caught in the elaborate train of her wedding dress. She stumbled, gasping audibly, the sound echoing through the concrete space like a gunshot. Michael's head snapped up immediately, his eyes meeting hers through the car window, and she watched the color drain from his face as he pushed Victoria away and scrambled to get out of the car. "Jessica, wait, this isn't what it looks like. Let me explain." But Jessica was already running, her wedding dress billowing behind her like the wings of some desperate bird as she fled back toward the club. Her mind was reeling, her chest tight with the kind of pain that felt like drowning, and she could hear Michael's footsteps pounding on the concrete behind her, gaining ground because she was handicapped by the elaborate dress that had been designed for beauty rather than mobility. Michael caught up to her in the stairwell between the parking garage and the main club, grabbing her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to leave bruises. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, his hair mussed from Victoria's fingers, and there was something wild and desperate in his eyes that Jessica had never seen before. "You need to calm down and listen to me," he said, his voice low and threatening in a way that made Jessica's blood run cold. "This is our wedding day, and you're going to walk down that aisle and marry me exactly like we planned. Too much is riding on this for you to have hysterics over something that doesn't mean anything." Jessica jerked her arm free, staring at him in disbelief and growing horror. "Are you insane? I just caught you with Victoria. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" Michael's mask of charm and sophistication finally slipped completely, revealing something ugly and entitled underneath. His family's wealth and status had always made him believe he could have whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it, and Jessica's defiance was clearly not part of his carefully orchestrated plan. "I don't understand the position you're putting me in," he hissed, stepping closer to her in the narrow stairwell, using his height and physical presence to intimidate her. "My father has business deals worth hundreds of millions riding on this wedding. The Ashford merger depends on our marriage creating the right family connections and social legitimacy. Victoria was just a way to relieve stress, a last moment of freedom before I settle down to married life." Jessica felt like she might vomit. "A business arrangement? That's what our marriage is to you? And Victoria is what, your real relationship, while I'm just some kind of corporate asset? Don't be naive, Jessica. You had to know what this was really about. Your brother's company, your social status now, the opportunities that have opened up for you. It's all connected to me and my family's position. Without this marriage, you'll go back to being nobody special. The daughter of dead immigrants with a law degree and a lot of student loan debt." The cruelty in his voice was like a physical slap, but it also clarified everything for Jessica in a way that almost felt like relief. She had genuinely loved Michael, had believed their relationship was real despite the obvious social and financial benefits it brought both families. To hear him reduce it to a business transaction while he carried on his real romantic relationship in secret was devastating, but it also freed her from any obligation to protect his feelings or preserve their relationship. "I'd rather be nobody special than live a lie," she whispered, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Michael's expression turned dangerous, and he grabbed her wrist so tightly that she cried out in pain. "You don't get to make that choice anymore, Jessica. Too much is at stake here. You're going to put on a smile, walk down that aisle, and marry me. We'll figure out the details of our arrangement later, but today you will do what's expected of you." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and for the first time in their 3-year relationship, Jessica felt genuinely afraid of the man she had been about to commit her life to. She wrenched her wrist free, feeling something tear in her dress as she did so, and ran up the stairs toward the main club. She needed help, needed someone who could see through Michael's family's power and influence to the truth of what he really was, someone who had the resources and determination to protect her from whatever retaliation Michael might attempt. She needed David. Back in the bridal suite, Jessica's hands shook as she dialed her brother's number, while Sarah fussed with last-minute preparations, still completely oblivious to the crisis that was unfolding. The room that had seemed like a fairy tale setting just an hour ago now felt suffocating, all that careful elegance suddenly seeming like an elaborate trap designed to keep her compliant and decorative. "David, I need you to come to the bridal suite right now," she said when he answered on the first ring, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an urgency that made him immediately alert. "Don't ask questions, just come. Please. And maybe bring security." "I'm on my way," David said without hesitation, and Jessica could hear him moving, issuing rapid instructions to someone in the background. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "Not physically. But David, everything is falling apart. Everything we thought we knew about Michael, about this wedding, about his family, it's all lies." Within minutes, David Martinez strode through the door of the bridal suite, his presence immediately commanding the room in a way that reminded Jessica why he had been so successful in the cutthroat world of technology and business. Tall and lean with the same dark eyes as Jessica, but carrying himself with the quiet confidence that came from building an empire from nothing, David took one look at his sister's tear-streaked face, and his expression hardened into something that would have made his corporate competitors very nervous. He was followed by 2 men in dark suits, who Jessica recognized as part of his personal security team, professionals who looked like they could handle any situation that might arise. "What happened?" David asked, his voice deadly calm in the way that people who knew him had learned meant he was at his most dangerous. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely, and she collapsed into her brother's arms, the whole story spilling out between sobs that ruined her carefully applied makeup. The anonymous message that had started this nightmare, the discovery in the parking garage that had shattered her world, Michael's cold admission that their relationship was primarily a business arrangement, his threats when she had tried to refuse to go through with the ceremony, the realization that she had been manipulated and used for 3 years, while Michael carried on his real relationship with Victoria Ashford. David listened in absolute silence, his jaw clenching progressively tighter, as Jessica described Michael's threats and the way he had grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises on her wrist. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for her ragged breathing and the distant sounds of wedding guests arriving and socializing downstairs, completely unaware that the day they had come to celebrate was collapsing into a nightmare. "Show me the photos," David said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that made smart people very careful about their next words. Jessica handed him her phone, watching his face as he studied the images she had captured. His expression didn't change, but she could see the way his hands clenched slightly as he took in the evidence of Michael's betrayal. "Sarah," David said, turning to Jessica's maid of honor, who had been listening to the whole story with growing shock and anger, "I need you to quietly start canceling vendors and making arrangements to shut down the reception. Don't make a big scene, but be ready to move quickly when we give the word." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her phone and moving toward the door. "I'll handle everything. Jess, whatever you decide to do, I'm with you completely." After Sarah left, David turned back to his sister, his expression gentle but determined. 200 guests downstairs, including half the political and business establishment of New England, the Thompson family's reputation, their business deals, the social embarrassment if this becomes public. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? Because once we act on this, there's no going back. They'll try to destroy you in every way they can. Jessica thought about Michael's cold calculation, his threats, the way he had tried to force her compliance through intimidation and financial manipulation. She thought about Victoria Ashford, probably downstairs right now among the wedding guests, playing the role of supportive family friend while carrying on her affair. She thought about the years of her life she had given to a man who saw her as a business asset rather than a human being worthy of love and respect. I won't live a lie, David. I won't be trapped in a marriage to a man who thinks he can threaten and manipulate me into submission, and I won't let them get away with treating people like commodities in their business games. David nodded slowly, a grim smile crossing his face. Then we do this right. We expose everything, but we do it smart, and we do it with overwhelming force. The Thompson family has old money, political connections, and social influence, but they've made the mistake of assuming that makes them untouchable. They'll try to destroy your reputation and claim you're mentally unstable, that you had pre-wedding jitters and invented the whole thing to get attention. He pulled out his own phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Spanish to someone who seemed to be waiting for his instructions. Jessica could only catch pieces of the conversation, but she heard references to legal teams, public relations firms, and something about activating the investigation. When he hung up, his expression was grimly satisfied. I've had a team of investigators looking into the Thompson family's business practices for months, ever since Michael started pushing for such a quick engagement and a big public wedding. Something about their urgency never felt right to me, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people's motivations. What did you find? Jessica asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know how deep the deception went. Enough to ensure that when you walk away from this wedding, Michael Thompson and his entire family won't be in any position to retaliate against you or anyone else. They've been running a sophisticated financial fraud operation for years, using their social position and reputation to gain access to investment opportunities that they've been systematically looting. There was a sharp knock at the door, and Michael's voice called through, tight with barely controlled panic. Jessica, we need to talk immediately. The ceremony should have started 30 minutes ago and people are starting to ask questions. You're embarrassing both our families with this behavior. David moved to the door, his presence filling the doorway as he opened it. Michael stepped back, clearly not expecting to face Jessica's brother, especially not David in full protective mode. Michael, David said with deceptive calm, I think you and I need to have a conversation instead. The confrontation moved to the club's private study, a room lined with leather-bound books and oil paintings of long-dead members, away from the growing crowd of confused and increasingly restless wedding guests. Michael's father, Robert Thompson, had been summoned along with Victoria's father, James Ashford, and the room was heavy with tension as three of Connecticut's most powerful families faced off in what everyone understood would determine the course of several futures. David placed a tablet computer on the mahogany desk, its screen displaying what appeared to be a comprehensive investigation report with financial documents, photographs, recorded conversations, and legal analysis that had clearly taken months to compile. Gentlemen, David said with the calm precision of someone who had prepared for this moment extensively, before we discuss my sister's wedding, I think you should know what my security and investigation team discovered about Thompson Investments' recent activities, as well as the Ashford family's involvement in those activities. Robert Thompson's face began to lose color as David scrolled through evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, securities fraud, and other financial crimes that the Thompson firm had apparently been running for years. The family's pristine reputation and social standing were built on a foundation of systematic criminal activity, and David had documented everything with the kind of thoroughness that came from unlimited resources and professional expertise. These are fabrications, Robert blustered, but his voice lacked conviction and his eyes were already calculating legal strategies and damage control measures. You can't possibly expect anyone to believe that our family, with our reputation and standing in the community, would be involved in anything improper. Audio recordings from wiretaps approved by federal judges, bank transfer records from multiple international accounts, email communications recovered from your private servers, testimony from 3 whistleblowers who have already entered witness protection, David continued methodically, his voice never rising but carrying the weight of absolute certainty, all verified by multiple independent sources and cross-referenced with federal databases. The Securities and Exchange Commission, The FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the IRS will all be very interested in this information. Michael stepped forward, his earlier confidence completely evaporating as he began to understand the scope of what David had uncovered and the implications for his family's future. What exactly do you want from us? I want my sister to walk out of here with her dignity intact, her reputation protected, and never be contacted by any member of your family again, David said simply. In exchange, this information stays private and doesn't get forwarded to the relevant federal agencies until you've had time to make arrangements for your legal defense. Jessica watched the exchange with a mixture of admiration for her brother's thoroughness and sadness at how completely she had been deceived about the people she had thought she knew, but she realized she needed to speak for herself, to take control of her own story, rather than letting the men in the room make decisions about her future. I also want Victoria to face the truth about what she's done, Jessica said, her voice steady despite the churning emotions in her chest. I want to understand how two people who claim to care about me could manipulate me so completely. Victoria, who had been sitting silently throughout the confrontation with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, finally looked up and spoke. You don't understand our situation, Jessica. Michael and I have been in love since we were teenagers. Our families have been planning our eventual marriage for years, but the business situation required him to marry someone outside the immediate family circle first. The casual admission hit Jessica like a physical blow, but it also answered questions that had been nagging at her subconscious for months. Then why didn't you just marry each other years ago instead of involving me in this elaborate deception? Because the Ashford-Thompson merger required Michael to marry someone who could provide social legitimacy and political connections that neither of our families could offer, Robert Thompson admitted reluctantly, his lawyer's instincts apparently telling him that full disclosure might be his only option for damage control. Your brother's success, your own professional accomplishments, your clean reputation, you were the perfect choice to bridge certain gaps in our social and political network. Jessica felt sick all over again, but also strangely relieved to finally understand the full scope of how she had been used. She had been selected like a business asset, courted and manipulated, while Michael's real relationship continued in secret, all so that two families could merge their criminal enterprises under the cover of social respectability. Who sent me the anonymous message? She asked quietly, needing to understand how the truth had finally come to light. Michael's expression was bitter as he glanced toward the door. Sarah, your precious maid of honor, has been in love with you for years and couldn't stand watching you marry me. She hired a private investigator to follow me and gather evidence. Jessica turned to look at Sarah, who had quietly entered the room and was standing by the door with tears in her eyes but her chin raised defiantly. The pieces fell into place. Sarah's protective nature toward Jessica, her subtle but persistent dislike of Michael, the way she had tried to discourage the engagement without being able to explain her reservations, her intimate knowledge of Jessica's schedule and access to her phone number. I'm sorry, Jess, Sarah said quietly. I hired a private investigator 3 months ago because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it until yesterday when we finally got photographs and recorded conversations. I couldn't let you marry him without knowing the truth, even if it meant risking our friendship. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the full implications of what had been revealed. Jessica stood in her wedding dress, surrounded by the wreckage of what she had believed was her perfect life, and realized she had a choice to make that would define not just her immediate future, but the kind of person she wanted to be. Michael made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, his voice taking on the manipulative charm that had once swept Jessica off her feet, but now sounded hollow and calculating to her ears. Jessica, please think about this rationally. We can make this work. Victoria was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by wedding stress and nostalgia for our childhood friendship. You and I have something real, something worth fighting for. Think about our future together, the life we've planned, the home we've designed, the children we've talked about having. But Jessica could see through the performance now, could recognize the practiced manipulation behind his words. He wasn't fighting for love. He was fighting to maintain his lifestyle, his family's criminal enterprise, and his own sense of entitlement to have everything he wanted without consequences. You just admitted that our entire relationship was arranged for business purposes, Jessica said quietly. You told me I was selected like a corporate asset. How am I supposed to believe that any of your feelings for me were ever real? Victoria stood up suddenly, her composure finally cracking under the weight of guilt and the collapse of all her carefully laid plans. Because they weren't entirely fake, Jessica. Michael did develop real feelings for you, even though our relationship never ended. That's what made this so complicated. Shut up, Victoria, Michael snapped, but the damage was already done. No, I won't shut up anymore, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. We've all lied enough. Jessica deserves to know the whole truth. Yes, Michael and I have been together since we were 16. Yes, our families arranged for him to marry you for business reasons. But he did fall in love with you, at least partially, which is why he's been so conflicted and why he's been treating both of us terribly for months. Jessica stared at Victoria, trying to process this additional layer of betrayal and manipulation. So I was supposed to be grateful for the scraps of genuine feeling he might have developed while he continued his real relationship with you? You were supposed to be satisfied with a comfortable life and social position, Robert Thompson interjected coldly. Most women in your situation would consider themselves fortunate to marry into a family like ours, regardless of the personal dynamics involved. The casual dismissal of her worth as a human being, the assumption that she should be grateful for crumbs of affection and respect, finally pushed Jessica past the point of sadness into pure, clarifying anger. "Get out," she said quietly, her voice carrying a steel that surprised everyone in the room. "All of you except David and Sarah. Get out now before I decide that destroying your lives publicly would be more satisfying than letting you slink away quietly." "Jessica, you need to think about the consequences," Michael started, but David stepped between them. "She asked you to leave," David said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that came from unlimited resources and the willingness to use them. "I suggest you do that now, while you still have the option of handling this privately." After the Thompsons and Ashfords left, Jessica sank into a leather chair, the weight of the day finally hitting her. 200 guests were waiting downstairs for a wedding that would never happen. The life she had planned was gone, replaced by uncertainty and the sting of betrayal, but also by a strange sense of freedom that she hadn't felt in years. "What am I going to do now?" she whispered, looking at the two people who had truly tried to protect her. Sarah knelt beside her chair, taking Jessica's hands. "You're going to survive this. You're going to be stronger than you ever imagined possible, and you're going to build a life that's actually yours instead of something designed by other people for their own purposes." David sat across from them, his expression gentle but determined. "You're going to come work with me in California, like I've been trying to get you to do for years. Martinez Industries needs someone with your legal expertise and strategic thinking, and you need a fresh start somewhere that Michael Thompson and his family can't touch you." Jessica looked down at her wedding dress, at the engagement ring that now felt like a shackle on her finger, at the reflection of herself in the room's antique mirror. In a few minutes, she would have to walk downstairs and face 200 people, announce that there would be no wedding, and begin the process of rebuilding her life from the ground up. But for the first time all day, she felt a spark of something that might have been hope mixed with her own strength that she had forgotten she possessed. The country club's main ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, with crystal chandeliers casting warm, golden light over tables adorned with white roses, baby's breath, and gold accents that had cost more than most people's annual salary. 200 guests sat in growing confusion and restlessness as the ceremony time passed without explanation, their murmurs growing louder and more speculative with each passing minute. The social elite of New England had gathered to witness what they expected to be the wedding of the year, and the delay was creating exactly the kind of social awkwardness that this crowd found deeply uncomfortable. Jessica stood at the top of the grand staircase that swept down into the ballroom, still in her wedding dress, but having removed her veil and engagement ring. The dress that had made her feel like a princess a few hours ago now felt like a costume from a play she no longer wanted to perform in. David stood beside her, his presence a source of strength and confidence, while Sarah had discreetly positioned herself near the main exit in case they needed to leave quickly to avoid media attention or confrontations. Taking a deep breath that she felt all the way to her toes, Jessica began her descent down the staircase. The crowd fell silent as she appeared, every eye in the room fixed on her, and she could feel the weight of their attention, their expectations, and their growing realization that something was very wrong with this picture. She could see Michael's family clustered near the altar that had been set up for the ceremony, their faces tight with anger, embarrassment, and what looked like fear. Victoria sat with her parents in the third row, her perfectly composed expression not quite hiding her satisfaction at Jessica's obvious distress, though there was also something that might have been guilt in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jessica began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics and expensive sound system, "thank you all for being here today to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of my marriage to Michael Thompson." She paused, looking around the room at faces she had known for years, family friends, college classmates, business associates of both families, social connections that had been carefully cultivated over decades. Many of these people had watched her relationship with Michael develop, had celebrated their engagement at lavish parties, had believed in their love story because it fit so perfectly into their understanding of how their world worked. "I've discovered that Michael has been having an affair throughout our engagement with someone who is here in this room today, and that our marriage was arranged primarily for business purposes rather than love or genuine affection. Under these circumstances, I cannot and will not proceed with this wedding." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs, gasps, and the kind of whispered conversations that spread through high society like wildfire. Michael stood near the altar, in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his face flushed with humiliation and rage that he was clearly struggling to control in front of so many important witnesses. His father stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation with the kind of authoritative presence that had served him well in boardrooms and political circles. "This is clearly pre-wedding stress and anxiety talking," Robert Thompson announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Jessica has had a very difficult and emotional day, and she's not thinking clearly. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony for a few hours while she composes herself." "No," Jessica said firmly, her voice cutting through his attempt to dismiss her. "This is me making an informed decision about my own life based on evidence and facts. I have photographs and other proof of Michael's infidelity, and I have chosen not to enter into a marriage based on deception, manipulation, and business convenience rather than mutual love and respect." David stepped slightly forward, his presence adding weight and credibility to Jessica's words. "The Martinez family might not have the old money prestige and political connections of the Thompsons, but David's success and reputation commanded respect in its own right, and everyone in the room knew that he was not someone who made dramatic gestures without having facts to back them up." Victoria stood up suddenly, her composure finally cracking under the pressure of being publicly exposed. "You're being dramatic and selfish, Jessica. Do you have any idea how many people's lives and business arrangements you're disrupting with this theatrical performance? Some things are more important than your hurt feelings." "Such as?" Jessica replied evenly, feeling calmer and more centered than she had in months. "Your business merger, your family's financial arrangements, the social convenience of everyone being able to pretend that love and marriage still matter in your world." The confrontation was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of several men in dark suits who moved through the crowd with the kind of professional efficiency that immediately identified them as law enforcement. Jessica recognized them from David's earlier description, federal agents whose presence meant that the investigation into Thompson Investments was apparently moving much faster than anyone had anticipated. The lead agent approached Robert Thompson with calm professionalism, but his presence sent a wave of panic through the Thompson family's section of the ballroom. Wedding guests watched in stunned fascination as badges appeared, and Miranda rights were read in clear official tones that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. "Robert Thompson, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes," the agent announced clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The federal agents worked with the kind of smooth coordination that spoke of months of preparation and planning. Wedding guests watched in shock and fascination as handcuffs appeared, and one of Connecticut's most respected businessmen was arrested in front of 200 witnesses, including politicians, judges, and social leaders who had considered Robert Thompson a pillar of their community. Michael watched his father being arrested with growing horror and disbelief, finally understanding that David Martinez had orchestrated not just Jessica's escape from their manipulative marriage arrangement, but the complete destruction of his family's criminal enterprise and social position. "This is all you're doing," Michael snarled at David, his carefully maintained facade of sophisticated charm completely gone. replaced by raw desperation and fury. You couldn't stand that Jessica chose me over your pathetic need to control her life, so you manufactured this whole scenario to destroy my family. David's response was measured and deadly calm, delivered in the tone he used in boardrooms when making decisions that would affect thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. I couldn't stand watching my sister being manipulated and used by criminals who saw her as a business asset rather than a human being deserving of love and respect. Everything that's happening to your family is the direct result of choices you made, crimes you committed, and lies you told. As Robert Thompson was led away in handcuffs, more federal agents approached Michael and James Ashford, Victoria's father. The investigation had apparently uncovered the full scope of their financial crimes, including Ashford's complicity in the money laundering scheme and Michael's own involvement in securities fraud through his work at Thompson Investments. Jessica watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief, vindication, and sadness that surprised her with its intensity. Justice was being served, but it came at the cost of completely destroying the life she had thought she wanted and exposing the corruption that ran through the social circle she had been trying so hard to join. The wedding guests were beginning to leave now, some stopping to offer Jessica support and admiration for her courage, others hurrying away from a scandal that would dominate social media, society pages, and business news for months to come. She could already see people pulling out their phones to text friends and post updates, turning her personal crisis into entertainment for people who thrived on gossip and drama. Michael made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the complete wreckage of his life, approaching Jessica with tears in his eyes and genuine panic in his voice. "None of this had to happen, Jessica. We could have had a good life together, even with all the complications. I did care about you, even if it wasn't the fairy tale romance you wanted. You've destroyed everything, my family, my career, my future. For what? Your pride? Your need to be the center of attention." Jessica looked at the man she had loved for 3 years, the man she had been prepared to spend her life with just hours ago, and felt something that might have been pity mixed with the remnants of old affection. "For my self-respect," Jessica replied quietly, her voice steady despite the emotional chaos surrounding them. "For the right to be loved honestly rather than used strategically. For the belief that marriage should be based on truth rather than business arrangements and criminal conspiracies." Sarah appeared at Jessica's side, having coordinated with the catering staff and wedding planners to handle the complex logistics of cancelling a reception for 200 guests. The efficiency with which she managed the crisis, while federal agents arrested members of 2 prominent families, only reinforced Jessica's growing understanding of how much her friend had been protecting her throughout this entire ordeal. "The cars are ready when you are," Sarah said softly, her hand resting supportively on Jessica's shoulder. "David's security team has cleared a path to avoid the media crews that are setting up outside." News crews had apparently gotten word of the dramatic wedding cancellation and federal arrests, with the speed that only major scandals involving wealthy families could generate. Camera crews were setting up outside the country club, reporters were making phone calls to editors and producers, and social media was already exploding with speculation and rumors about what had happened at what was supposed to be the social event of the season. Victoria, whose father was now also in federal custody, finally approached Jessica, with something approaching genuine remorse and vulnerability, replacing her earlier defiance and satisfaction. "I never meant for it to hurt you this much," she said, tears streaming down her face for the first time since Jessica had known her. "Michael and we've been in love since we were children, but our families said we had to wait. That business considerations came first, that we needed to establish the right social and political connections before we could be together publicly." Jessica looked at the woman who had been willing to let her live an elaborate lie for the sake of financial arrangements and family expectations. "Then you should have fought for your love instead of letting me be used as a placeholder while you carried on your real relationship in secret. You should have had the courage to tell your families that their business arrangements weren't worth destroying innocent people's lives." As the federal agents finished their work and the wedding guests dispersed into the Connecticut evening, some in shocked silence, others in animated conversation about the scandal they had just witnessed, Jessica stood in the empty ballroom, still wearing her wedding dress. The fairy tale setting now looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster, with abandoned flower arrangements, overturned chairs, and the detritus of dreams that had collapsed under the weight of truth and justice. David approached his sister, his expression mixing pride in her courage with concern for her emotional state. "Are you ready to get out of here? We can go back to your apartment to pack, or we can send people to handle that later. Whatever you need." Jessica took one last look around the ballroom that had been decorated for the happiest day of her life, then at the man who had just been arrested for financial crimes, then at the woman who had been carrying on an affair with her fiancé throughout their entire relationship. She felt a strange sense of completion, as if she had been living someone else's story and was finally ready to start writing her own. "I'm ready," she said simply. "I'm ready to start over." 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened, Jessica sat in the law offices of Morrison, Blake & Associates, one of New York's most prestigious firms specializing in white-collar criminal defense, watching Michael Thompson try to negotiate a plea deal that might save him from following his father to federal prison. The young man who had once swept her off her feet with his charm and sophistication now looked haggard and desperate, his expensive suit unable to disguise the toll that public disgrace and criminal charges had taken on him. The Thompson family's legal troubles had exploded across business news and social media, with the kind of intensity that only major financial scandals involving prominent families could generate. Robert Thompson's arrest at his son's wedding had become a symbol of elite corruption, and investigative journalists were digging into every aspect of the family's business dealings going back decades. Jessica's presence at the plea negotiations was voluntary. She could have testified by deposition or video conference, but she had wanted to face Michael one more time, to see if there was anything left of the man she had once loved, or if that person had ever existed at all. "My client is prepared to provide full cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced charges and a recommendation for minimum sentencing," Michael's lawyer announced to the room full of federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and legal representatives. "That cooperation will need to include detailed testimony about his family's money laundering operations, his own role in securities fraud, and his knowledge of the broader criminal conspiracy," replied the lead federal prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s who had built her career on taking down white-collar criminals who thought their wealth and social position made them untouchable. Jessica watched Michael's face as he realized that saving himself would require completely destroying what remained of his family's reputation and potentially sending additional family members to prison. The man who had tried to force her into marriage through threats and manipulation was now facing the consequences of years of criminal activity. "There's something else," Michael said suddenly, looking directly at Jessica for the first time since the negotiations had begun. "Something I need to say before we go any further with this." His lawyer tried to stop him, but Michael continued speaking with the desperate honesty of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Jessica, I did love you. Not the way I should have. Not honestly or completely. But there were real feelings there. The business arrangement, the merger plans, the social connections. That's how it started, but somewhere along the way I did fall in love with you, even though I was too cowardly and too selfish to end things with Victoria or tell you the truth about what our families were planning." Jessica felt a complicated mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and something that might have been the closure she hadn't realized she needed. "If you loved me, you would have protected me from being used and manipulated," she replied quietly. "You would have told me the truth, instead of letting me plan a future based on lies. Love isn't just a feeling, Michael. It's how you treat people, how you honor their trust, how you protect their dignity and well-being." Michael nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know that now. Too late, but I know it. For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it." The plea negotiations continued for several more hours, with Michael providing detailed information about offshore accounts, fraudulent investment schemes, and the network of wealthy individuals and businesses that had been involved in the Thompson family's criminal operations. His testimony would eventually lead to dozens of additional arrests and the recovery of hundreds of millions of dollars that had been stolen from investors and hidden from tax authorities. When Jessica finally left the law offices that evening, she felt emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. The man she had planned to marry was going to federal prison. His family's empire was completely destroyed, and her own life had been turned upside down. But she was finally free from the web of lies and manipulation that had defined her relationship for 3 years. David was waiting for her outside the building, leaning against his car with the patient concern of someone who had spent years protecting his little sister from harm. "How do you feel?" he asked simply. "Like I can finally breathe," Jessica replied, and realized she meant it completely. 6 months later, Jessica stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of Martinez Industries' San Francisco headquarters, looking out over Silicon Valley as the sun set behind the mountains that framed the Bay Area. The view was spectacular, but what struck her most was how different she felt from the woman who had stood in a wedding dress, surrounded by lies and manipulation, just half a year ago. She wore a tailored business suit that she had chosen herself, her hair pulled back in a professional style that reflected her new role as Senior Vice President of Legal Affairs and Strategic Development for Martinez Industries. The transition from New York society lawyer to Silicon Valley technology executive hadn't been easy, but it had been exactly the challenge she needed to rebuild her sense of self and her confidence in her own judgment. The media attention from the wedding scandal had followed her across the country initially, with tabloids and business journals speculating about everything from her mental health to her brother's role in exposing the Thompson family's crimes. But David had shielded her from the worst of it, while giving her meaningful work that utilized not just her legal expertise, but her strategic thinking and her hard-earned understanding of how powerful people could manipulate systems for their own benefit. "The quarterly reports exceed every projection," David said, joining Jessica at the window. "Your work on the Strategic Partnerships Initiative has generated more revenue in 6 months than our previous legal team managed in 2 years, and the anti-fraud protocols you've developed are becoming the industry standard." Jessica smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was entirely her own for the first time in her adult life. Building something real through her own efforts, earning respect through her actual capabilities rather than her social connections, felt infinitely more satisfying than the comfortable life that had been handed to her through her engagement to Michael. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation," she said, the idea that had been developing in her mind for months finally ready to be shared, "for women who need help leaving abusive or manipulative relationships. Financial support, legal aid, career development, safe housing, everything someone would need to escape a situation like mine, but especially resources for women who don't have a billionaire brother to protect them." David nodded approvingly, his expression showing the pride he felt in his sister's growth and strength. "The Jessica Martinez Foundation has a nice ring to it, and I think our board would approve a substantial initial funding commitment." Sarah appeared in the doorway, now serving as Director of Community Outreach for Martinez Industries' charitable initiatives. Their friendship had grown stronger through the crisis, built now on complete honesty, rather than the protective secrets Sarah had felt compelled to keep during the months when she was investigating Michael's infidelity. "The interview requests are still coming in," Sarah reported, holding a tablet showing dozens of media requests. 60 Minutes wants to do a segment on white-collar crime and family manipulation. The Times wants to feature you in their series on women who've overcome major life challenges. And 3 different publishers want to discuss book deals. Jessica had been reluctant to exploit her personal trauma for public attention, but she was beginning to understand that her story could help other women recognize the signs of manipulation and find the courage to leave situations that were destroying their self-worth and autonomy. "Schedule the 60 Minutes interview," she decided. "But I want to focus on the foundation and the resources we're developing rather than the personal drama. My story is only interesting if it helps other people avoid similar situations or escape from them." As the sun set over the Bay Area, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The anonymous text message that had shattered her wedding day had actually been the beginning of her real life, the first step toward becoming the person she was meant to be rather than the person other people had tried to shape her into. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Saw your interview in Forbes about the new foundation. Your courage in leaving that situation and turning your experience into something that helps others is inspiring. Proud of the woman you've become. A friend who cares." Jessica smiled, recognizing the same style as the message that had started her journey toward freedom 6 months ago. She suspected the message was from someone in her old social circle, possibly another woman who had been trapped in similar circumstances, and found inspiration in Jessica's public rejection of the manipulation and abuse that wealthy families often disguised as tradition and social expectation. She typed back, "Thank you for saving my life. I hope you know how much courage it took to send that first message, and how grateful I am that you did." The response came quickly. "You saved your own life. I just provided information. What you did with it was all you." As Jessica stood in her office, surrounded by the fruits of her own labor, and looking forward to a future built on her own terms, she thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, desperate to fit into a world that saw her as a commodity, willing to ignore her own instincts in favor of social acceptance, trapped in a relationship that was slowly destroying her sense of self-worth. The wooden bat of betrayal that Michael had used to try to destroy her spirit had instead shattered the chains that kept her from her true potential. Justice hadn't just been served in courtrooms and federal prisons, it had been served in the form of a life lived authentically, free from manipulation and full of genuine purpose. Michael Thompson was serving a 7-year sentence in federal prison, his family's financial empire completely dismantled, their social position destroyed beyond repair. Victoria had fled to Europe to escape the scandal, her own family's reputation permanently tainted by their involvement in the criminal conspiracy. The anonymous message that had seemed like the end of Jessica's world had actually been the beginning of justice for everyone who had been hurt by their actions. But more importantly, Jessica had discovered who she really was when stripped of other people's expectations and manipulations. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, more capable than she had been allowed to believe, and more valuable than the commodity price that others had tried to place on her. The woman who had once stood in a wedding dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her planned life, had become someone who could help other women escape similar traps and build lives of genuine meaning and authentic happiness. As she prepared to leave her office and meet friends for dinner, friends who valued her for her intelligence, her integrity, and her compassion rather than her social connections or her usefulness in business arrangements, Jessica felt the deep satisfaction that came from living a life that was truly her own. The foundation would launch next month, with sufficient funding to help hundreds of women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. The story of her dramatic wedding day would become a powerful tool for helping others recognize manipulation and find the courage to choose truth over comfort. And Jessica Martinez, who had once been selected as a business asset in someone else's game, had become the author of her own story, the architect of her own future, and living proof that sometimes the worst betrayal could lead to the greatest freedom.